And thank you for joining us today on this webinar. My name is Daryl Smith. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Industrial Minerals Association North America, and we do appreciate your time today to listen in on this webinar titled What, Why, and How OSHA 18001 Implementation at a Sand Company, to be presented by Bobby Carlson, and I'll introduce Bobby in just a moment. But first of all, allow me to cover some logistical issues. Following the webinar, whether you attended or not, just because you signed up, you'll receive a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that is synced with the recording of the webinar. So you'll be able to watch it and listen to it at your desk just like you were here. Those usually come out within 24 hours after the webinar finishes up. And secondly, during the course of the webinar, all the lines will be muted. If you have any questions, feel free to just start typing those in at any time, and we'll give the questions to Bobby either during the course of the webinar or at the end of the webinar. And we were talking just before everybody got online. It's not a colossally huge group. It's about 20 of us on the phone, and we know most of you. We may actually decide to try to open the lines at the end of the webinar. We haven't decided that yet. If we have a lot of questions, we might do that. But now, allow me to introduce Bobby Carlson, who many of you know. He is the Director of Health and Safety at Fairmont Minerals. He is based in Chicago. Bobby is a graduate of Illinois State University with a degree in Occupational Safety and Health and Construction Management. And I actually didn't know about the construction management part, Bobby, so I'll have to ask you about that one day. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bobby, and we do appreciate his time for doing this webinar for us. Are you there,
Hi,
Bobby?
thanks, Daryl. Yep, I'm all set. So I'll give a little bit of a background as far as myself and management systems in 18001. About 17 years ago, I started with a company called Material Service out of Chicago. And about 6-7 years into that, we decided to take up 14001 and 18001 for the safety side. Company is about 850 employees. It was a mix of mining, about 13 mining locations, about 8 OSHA locations. It included rail and barging. We did push our own barges with our own boats. So a pretty good mix there. So we went through the course. It took about 3 to 4 years to fully implement that program, and we did get the entire company OHSAS 18001 certified. At that point in time, Hansen purchased Material Service. I had about 10, 11 years experience in and wanted to go off on my own, and came across Fairmont Minerals, who was looking for, of course, a Director of Safety and Health. And they were also looking for going 18001 and didn't have any systems in place at that time. So it was a blank slate, which was very nice in that aspect. So I built it from the ground up. So what, why, and how is the title of this presentation specifically for Fairmont Minerals, and a little bit of background there. The basics that we're going to go over today, what is the OHSAS 18001? Really, what is a management system? What can it do for you? Why did Fairmont initiate it? And then, of course, how we did it. So a management system basically is how we do our jobs to accomplish our business objectives. So we all have goals in safety and health, and you have to make a plan in order to achieve those objectives and goals. That is the intent of 18001. A set of auditable guidelines, because of course with any type of management system, in order to prove its worth, it must be audited, for running our business in a way that minimizes our health and safety risks. If you were to put 18001 and 14001 side by side in front of you and flip through the pages, you would have difficulty in telling them apart. There are some subtle differences inside of there. For the most part, you could literally just switch out the word environmental with health and safety, switch out aspects and impacts with risk, and you would have the same management system. I think the simplest way to explain this type of management system is a plan, do, check, act. When you look at a lot of safety and health programs, and there's good ones out there, and you build your programs off of a fall protection, a lockout, tagout program, a hazard communication program, those do a good job for compliance. But you really need some other mechanism there that says, hey, we're going to put a plan into effect in order to achieve all of these, which includes compliance to these regulated standards. We're going to implement this out into the field. We are going to have a system in place to where we have to check to make sure that we are compliant, not just to the regulatory, but to our internal procedures. Once you find something that needs some type of corrective action, this management system has controls in effect that require you to act and document that. For me, that's the critical step in a management system, is that acting upon what you found, that there's accountability, that there is a deadline set, and that you have to prove in the system that you've acted and improved and run a risk assessment against it and been successful. So again, for me, out of those plan, do, check, act, this brings the act into effect. What we've got up on the screen here is right out of the 18,001. This is their plan, do, check, act mechanism, where they talk about putting a policy in place, planning it, so there's your plan. Do is the implement an operation. Checking and putting corrective actions has a component there of checking and also acting upon. And then a management review so that it goes back up that ladder and management actually sees that we are taking effect and responsibility and accountability for all of these. It allows management to make decisions on what's going on that day-to-day basis, and eventually strives for continual improvement. So it's interesting, as we go through this entire process, and I'm actually going to break this down as quickly as I can and go through each of the major components of 18,001. But perhaps while we're doing this, you ponder to yourself and take some notes thinking about, where is my system at right now? And if I were to go 18,001 as an example for a management system, what's that gap difference between where I would need to be? Ultimately, we're looking at identifying our risks and taking action upon them. That we have a clear responsibility set there. That we have communication among the key players, and it makes you put it into the procedures what those communications are so that you have follow through. Of course, everything revolves around health and safety in 18,001. Again, not to be redundant, but one of the whys is a universal, a corporate type of procedure and policy out there, so we're all apples to apples and it's consistent. 18,001, like I've said, blends wonderfully with 14,000 and 9,000 and can work with each other and even share a lot of the same procedures and policies, so you don't necessarily have to be redundant. When we go through this, you don't just think in terms of what you might have as procedure and policy within your safety and health program, but you also think about what you have in your human resources, in your quality 9,000, in your environmental, in your operations, because those are all the tools that you can draw upon. They don't necessarily have to be isolated within your health and safety program. Continuous improvement, we know that name. I'm sure everybody uses it regularly, and I equate it to a best practice and always striving to do better. The other thing I like about the 18,001 and the way it has you set it up is it becomes a one-stop shop. There should never be any confusion as to where you need to go to find your answers in regards to health and safety and risk management. The other item within this that truly helps is some type of document control system. It's scary to put, we'll say, a hazard communication program out there in the year 2000. Go back and you've had changes throughout the year, and even most recently, you know, with the changes that OHSA has had in regards to hazard communication and the global harmonization coming to it. So we've made changes within our system, but if you were to go out there into each of your facilities, would you find an outdated hazard communication that does not have these components? At least within a management system such as 18001, it forces you to be accountable to each document and that it is current and up to date, and they are following those current procedures. Comparable between internal and external, what I mean about that, anybody else on the line that brings an 18001 program to certification is probably online with what Fairmont is. Or if one of my suppliers or contractors come in and they say that they're 18001, I have a perfect idea of what type of system they have in place for their own accountability and risk management. Really, that is the ultimate intent of going to an ISO type of program. Also, proof, whether it's internally the board of directors asking you to prove your worth and that your safety and health program is up to merit, or whether you need to do that for external stakeholders to prove that you're worthy. Of course, 18001 is the world's most recognized health and safety management system. So moving on to the why. Because 18001 there is no, because 18001 is there to manage your occupational safety and health without necessarily dictating how you do it. So I would encourage you, if you went to an 18001 class and learned the system, became an auditor or an internal auditor, that you always keep in your mind, it is what you do. It's not necessarily something you purchase off the shelf and are forced to put your square block into that round peg. You design it to what you have and the tools that you are using. I'll give an example of this. In most cases, in order to quantify or qualify your risk, they ask you to make a matrix. You know, whether they're using severity and frequency on the axis and a numbering system from 1 to 10, where in the bottom left-hand corner, a 1 would be no severity, no frequency, up to the upper right-hand corner, a 10 being could happen at any moment and it's very dangerous. I threw all of that out. They preach those matrix, and I don't even use them. So I use the tools that Fairmont has internally and not necessarily what we'll say the 18001 community may prefer. So I always keep that in the back of my mind. It's what Fairmont does, not necessarily what others in the industry have chosen to design their system. How would I start if I was back at ground zero? Again, the first thing that I would do is get that 18001 document. I think it's $50 online to buy the PDF. I would use it as a checklist and gap analysis where I am at, line by line, trying to answer how do I do this and how would I answer an auditor if they ask me this question. At the end of that process, it doesn't take very long. I think the whole thing is probably 18 pages at most, so it's not overwhelming. At the end of that, I would be able to tell where my gaps were at, and then I have to ask myself, if I were to come up with systems, procedures, and tools to fill those gaps, does it add value to my company? Is this something that's going to reduce risk inside of my company, or is this going to become burdensome? I'll give an example of that with Fairmont Minerals. When it comes to facilities that have 5 or less employees at them, we do not initiate an 18001 program. They use a lot of the components, and they still are accountable to the regulatory side and the best practices. But as far as going to that full degree, we choose to have them 18001 compliant, but not necessarily certified. So we're looking for that value added out of the system. It must work for us. Focus on what you do or you will do. You see value added. Again, when it comes to the registrar, the third party that you're going to hire to come in and audit your system, shop around. It's not like MSHA or OHSA where they send somebody out and you have to work with that inspector or that auditor. You get to shop for the auditor. You find an auditor with a background similar to what your company is doing, that understands mining or understands the OHSA process, has a mixture of both. That is willing to not necessarily just look at the paperwork end, but the implementation. Or maybe you want to do it vice versa. You want somebody that's not necessarily out in the field kicking the tires, but is looking more at the document type of system and procedural system. You get to shop. You literally hire your registrar and your auditors. On another sidebar, the first auditor that I hired for my 18001, I fired after one round. Just didn't mesh with us. He wasn't Fairmont friendly. We're a very appreciative company. He didn't seem to be very appreciative. I replaced him. Simple as that. And again, I kind of mentioned this. You can decide on whether you want to really make this more of a written procedural type, or if you want it more of a field and actuality type of system. You just need to use the tools that you have to show that you are compliant to the standard, the intent of the standard. Then there's other types of options there. You can go facility by facility and get individual certifications, or you can group them together and have a whole corporation, or even by business division. So for Fairmont Minerals as an example, we're starting out with individual site certifications. We're in our third year of certifications right now, and I have enough individual sites that now I'm going to look at starting to group them together. Next year I may look at getting the industrial sand part of division of the company one certification, the manufacturing division of the company a separate certification, and just have two certifications. The risk in that is any one oops at one of those facilities brings the rest down. They could lose that cert for the rest of them. But I like that. I like the premise that they all must work together. Any one of them can cause failure for the rest. A little bit of camaraderie mixed with a little bit of competition. Basic tools that you really must have to even kind of wrap your mind around starting this process, or your gap analysis is going to be a little frustrating, is some type of risk assessment process. That you get out there, you do some inspections. When you find hazards, that you do some type of risk, low, medium, high, and that gives you direction on how quickly you want to act upon it. There's some risks that we all know. I'm preaching to the choir here. They're cause for immediate action. Shut that down. We got to do something. And then there's other that may fall more towards a best practice. Hey, we can improve on this. It's not really a super high priority because of high risk, so that would end up in the low category. You need some type of thought process for a risk assessment. That you are managing your incident cases properly. There is some type of format and procedure behind how you manage them. Of course, your emergency management must be in place. Good communication lines. The opportunity for additional training. Fairmont does not only an annual 8-hour refresher at both our MSHA and OHSA facilities, but we also do an hour of safety training every month. and then you can drill down a little bit further into the site safety committee meetings and the toolbox talks. So we have that training in place. Management buy-in, I think that's a given. They've got to be the driver behind this. You will have to set some type of objectives and goals. 18,001, that's a whole section of the requirements, is that you are assessing your risk and then setting objectives and goals in order to eliminate that risk. And of course, measuring that through some type of metrics. Some of the aspects inside of 18,001 that you don't necessarily need to begin with, you can build as you're working towards the 18,001 compliance, would be the document and record control, management reviews, starting to initiate those. Now, the 18,001 only requires you to do a management review annually. In most cases, companies do this on a quarterly basis. If not, if you're just doing them annually or not at all, you know, there's a lot of benefit, and this is a positive that 18,001 brings into your organization, is doing more of a quarterly review so you stay fresh on your objectives and your risks and your impacts so that you can take immediate action from management, set directives, set responsibilities, set milestones. Management of change is a wonderful program if it's done right. For those of you who are familiar with this, it basically stems out of OSHA's process safety management system. But we do ours through a what-if analysis. What if I implemented or changed this part of the system? Would it affect safety, environmental, sales, operations, and such? And if so, if it makes a big enough impact, I should initiate a management of change. I therefore can get support from those other departments, even put that accountability onto the other department to respond to this aspect of this change, of this project that I'm putting into place. Done correctly, management of change can definitely be as much of a risk assessment and risk mitigation tool as your standard audits or site inspections can be, because this catches it when it's fresh and coming, when that change is coming into the facility. All right, I'm going to take a breath here. The how. What I've outlined here are all the components of 18,001. I'm going to take a few minutes to briefly kind of touch on each of these as to how Fairmount Minerals has kind of addressed this. So our first one is our hazard identification and risk assessment. We do have a scheduled inspection and audit program. It follows our annual agenda. Basically, we have about 30 safety and health programs. Some of them are your staple, your fall protection, your lockout, tagout. Other ones are a little bit more best practice, like your incentive program. We have a program called Bringing Safety Home, where we try and bring safety outside of our gates, that off-the-job type of safety. But at any rate, we break those 30 into, divide them by 12 and split them up, and then each month we attack those components, those programs during that month with inspections, with audit, with backup training onto those. So we put that into place. Root cause and risk assessment. If anybody joined last week or the week before when we did the Industry Safe, Fairmount uses a www.industrysafe.com third-party software. Within that, we can manage incidents, accidents, near misses, observations, training, and corrective actions. The corrective actions component of Industry Safe is actually like a work order. Wonderful tool. But within both the incident component and the corrective action work order component, we have built-in risk assessments. So now through my management system, which 18,001 has helped me identify and put into a structure and procedure, I have built into my tools to have a risk assessment like a 5Y into the accident investigation, and then it also has a risk assessment into that corrective action work order to make sure that whatever solutions we came up with are proper and don't bring risk and actually mitigate risk. We follow, of course, engineering, administrative, and PPE type of controls. I do call my corrective actions and preventative actions, basically I think of them as the same concept. One hurdle that I will admit to as far as the auditors is having to go in and rewrite my system so that the definition of work order equals corrective and or preventative measure. Auditors think of them as two completely isolated items. You know, preventative is the pre, corrective is after something has happened. I group them into one because what I've done, whether it's before or after, I've identified something and I'm taking action upon it. Jumping into the next section, your legal requirements. And so many of us follow publications, are sent to us to keep us up to date. Associations like the IMANA and their newsletters and their emails, which keep us abreast of all of the current legal actions and regulatory actions. Subscriptions that you may have like BLR, JJ Keller, which do the same thing. You can find anything and everything by federal, state, and local, and any other resources that you may have out there. Again, what 18,001 does is has a procedure and documents all of these resources and assures that we are taking a look and taking action and communicating this out to all of your facilities. How we do that at Fairmount Minerals is all the EH&S coordinators, managers, and even myself as a director put out a weekly update to the managers. Within that weekly update is a component that has all the hot regulatory items in there. So every week they get a quick one-stop shop glimpse at the hot items. The other thing we have documented in this part of our program is our resources, such as one of IMANA's members is Adele Abrams, serving as a lawyer, and I have all her information in there. Ralph Christensen, who is a ex-MSHA inspector who turned support for audits and training, any type of help you need for safety and health, third party, just as a couple examples. So I have a plethora of resources on one document that can be shared throughout the company, and everybody knows where they can go to find a resource if they need it. Objectives and setting some type of objective, some type of goal. For us, on the corporate level, we do set safety and health goals through our Sustainable Development Program. In addition to that, each site comes up with some specific safety and health goals. I personally consider any corrective or preventative action to be put into place to be, number one, an identification of risk, and number two, that work order is a new safety and health objective for a corrective action. And I've convinced my auditors of that. Therefore, you can see in this process, even on the screen right here, I really don't need that risk matrix anymore. I'm doing it on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute type of concept. And of course, best practices would be the preventative action side of that. Resources, roles, and authority. We basically use job descriptions. And I'll leave it at that and move on. Training, awareness, and competence. On the MSHA side, we can really see this. We're required to do training and awareness, and then we even need to do task training and have the supervisor sign off when they believe that individual is competent to perform that job safely. This helps us in that best practice realm because it's not necessarily required in all cases on the OSHA side, but it allows us, because this is all under one umbrella, to bring that competence level throughout the organization. Communication, participation, and consultation. This is both for internal and then again for your external stakeholders. We have a very strong safety committee on the site levels. We do newsletters and display screens. We get out into the community. We have a safety hotline that's printed onto all of our labels of our products in order to bring that communication and consultation internally and externally. Document and data control. This is one you're going to have to figure out on your own. You're going to have some codified system out there in order to have these documents in some systematic manner so that they can be traceable, trackable. One tool that we had at Fairmont that I wasn't necessarily wouldn't be my first choice until I got to learn it is Microsoft SharePoint. Once I got into it and learned the system, I think it was built for ISO systems. It's fantastic. One of the major items that I love about SharePoint is that it's automatically archiving previous versions. This comes in on a legal matter, but also it's required under 18,001 per the standard. So you can see if you had an incident 2 years ago and you need to go in front of an administrative law judge, a regular judge, depositions and such, you can't bring your safety program that you have on your current date. You have to bring the safety program that you had on the day of the incident, which means when you're done with a version of your program, you can't just shred it. You really need to archive that for future. SharePoint does that automatically. One of the reasons I love it. It also has another option on it called a workflow where you can start a email for review and update and comments and set an email round that you want it to go to, and it hits one person at a time, like checking out a book and returning it, and sends it around the horn until you get it back with their comments. I mean, there's lots of great tools to it. Just an example of how Fairmont Minerals has decided to address their document and data control systems. Operational control component, I simply call that my safety and health programs. Again, we're talking about confined space, lockout, tagout, emergency action plans, that part. So that component should already be in place at everybody's operations. You could probably say the same thing about emergency preparedness. That's all it's basically saying. You better know the who, what, when, where, and how for emergencies, response, emergency drills for pre-planning. We've even taken it a step further, and we do have a crisis management and media relations plan so that we address that up front. So it's brought some good things to Fairmont Minerals. Monitor and record of health and safety performance, helping outline your key performance indicators, your metric reports. Industry Safe does a lot of that for us. You can go in there in real time because it has current work hours, it has the current incidents and everything in there, and I can draw upon near misses, observations, training, corrective actions, and I think somewhere around 1,000 different metrics I can pull out. I can make it all FML. I can do it by division, such as sand side or manufacturing side. I can do it by region. I can do it by site. It's a wonderful tool that we had in place. The monitoring side of that, of course, kind of draws back to those management reviews, gets into the communication side to where once a month we will email out basic metrics to everybody, and then even in our weekly updates, any milestones, key performance indicators that may require action. So this section has helped Fairmont as well in that, number one, measuring it, and number two, communicating it. Accidents, incidents, nonconformities, and corrective actions. I've drilled into this pretty good already. Investigate why things went wrong and then try to prevent them from reoccurring, I think is everybody's rule out there and goal out there. Again, being compliant and certified 18001 means auditors are going to get in here and really analyze how well you're doing this. Right now for Fairmont, we're good at the investigations. We're good at the risk assessments. We're good at the corrective actions. Where our focus is now for that continuous improvement is that root cause analysis. We use a very simple process, the 5 why, but it's getting past the first, second, and third, actually drilling down till you get that 5th why. And then on the corrective action side, we implemented something else called a 5 how, where there's 5 steps that require you to do in order to come up with a good corrective action, such as, I'll give an example, such as asking more than one person and or more than one department for their suggestion for a corrective action. So we broaden that scope and broaden our input, and it's not necessarily just the EH&S person sitting at a desk that has to come up with a corrective action, or the third shift supervisor that's responsible for an incident happening in their area coming up with that corrective action, that they reach out, find multiple sources. So just an example of how Fairmont Minerals is getting better because of 18001's draw. We're nearing the end here. Audit your management system. We do it with program checklists. So for each of those components, whether it be the ISO components that we're discussing here or drilling down a little bit further into the fault protection, hazard communication, and such, we have devised checklists that are constantly improving as we do more and more of them, and we use these to audit our program. And in addition, 18001 requires you to have an internal an internal certified lead auditor go to facilities and operations that are not under their control. So for example, my Ohio EH&S coordinator, who's an internal auditor, will go to Wisconsin to audit their programs. Wisconsin will go to Illinois. Illinois will go to Ohio. So you get that third, that outside look coming into your facility. And again, that is required by the standard. Therefore, you have to do it. I think it's wonderful. Here we are at the last component, the management reviews. These can be done on a divisional level, a regional level, by the facility itself, or even by the departments itself. Again, 18001 doesn't govern how you do it as long as you are managing it. So you have that leeway inside of the system. You just better be able to prove that you have done that management review, that you have addressed your issues, that you've looked at your objectives, that you've identified your risks, and that you've taken action upon it. So for Fairmont Minerals, again, we do have a good health and safety team, and absolutely they play a key role. They are the champions and the mentors of the program, but they can't do it all. Remembering the fact that 18001 should be what you do, which means it's what the operations are doing for health and safety, how they are controlling risk in their facility. They own it. Documents are nice. It's always interesting if an event occurs, you go back and look and see if you had that documented as a do or don't. But that doesn't solve anything. Again, it's what happens out in the field. So I wouldn't get too hung up on procedures. My entire 18001 procedural document is only 24 pages long. So everything that we've addressed right here, I've squeezed into 24 pages. anything and everything you need to know. Small, concise. The other nice thing that I've been able to do because the technology is make it virtually paperless. The entire system is on that SharePoint. Industry takes care of a lot of that documentation. Paper may come from a doctor because of an incident, but it gets scanned in and stored properly and protected under HIPAA. About the only real paper that we have there out in the field may be your pre-shift workplace inspection sheet, as an example. But otherwise, this management system and really working with the document control and record keeping aspect of it has brought us to, I would say, 95% paperless program. All of my audits are done when the auditor comes into the facility. Again, 95% of the items that he wants to see in regards to documents and records are displayed on a large projection screen and not through 3-ring binders and file folders. And again, you know, it's drilling it down. It pulls every employee into managing their risks. The fact that it requires that communication and participation, it forces you to build safety committees and have them functional safety committees, brings everybody into this entire system. And with that, Daryl, I've made it to the end.
Well, that was very good, Bobby. We appreciate it. Hey, so we've got a couple questions so far, and I think what we're going to do is just, in case anybody would rather speak their question or converse with Bobby, we're going to unmute the lines. So you would have to have been called in to actually speak. So I'm not sure how many are just listening on their computer, so we might not get a lot of feedback that way, but we are going ahead right now and opening the lines. So, but we do have a couple questions already.
Okay.
One is, can you estimate the amount?
Hello.
Hit the wrong button.
Hey, Bobby, you still there? I think we actually muted you or something. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
Start over.
You need to start over.
Okay. The question was, can you estimate the amount of time it took to implement an 18001 system?
It's going to vary by every company. If you already have your programs and a lot of these systems in place, you know, after you do your gap analysis, you'd be the best guesstimate as to determining how long it would take you to bring those gaps up to par. For Fairmount Minerals, when I came in, they had a very basic off-the-shelf safety and health program, you know, fill in your company name here type of program. We managed to turn that completely around in 1 year, and 9 months later, we had all the components that I presented today in place. Now, that's the implementation stage. It was about a year after that, so we're talking maybe a 3-year cycle that we achieved our first certification. But again, that was almost from ground zero. Many of you already have a tremendous amount of these components already in place, and I could see you turning it around within a year. It's certainly feasible. One thing we got to remember about 18001 is that it's what you do, and as long as you can convince that auditor that you are addressing your risk and that you are hitting these components, you might get some opportunities for improvement, or maybe 1 or 2 non-compliance issues that you have to fix and respond to, but you still get the certification.
Okay, and the other question I have is relative to small organizations. Do you think smaller companies can implement 18001 systems?
I think they can. They may not necessarily want to go the full bore for an actual certification unless they have value added due to customer demands. But they can certainly use it as a tool to improve their management system, without a doubt. I mean, this is a wonderful structure to close that gap on the Plan, Do, Checked Act. So I would definitely recommend using use it as a best practice for some of the smaller organizations.
Okay, and I think we have successfully unmuted the lines. Is there anybody there that would like to ask a question?
Bobby, do you hear me?
I do.
Bobby, this is Mark Buckley at Nyco Minerals. How many sites does Fairmont have under its certification?
11, and we're going to pick up another 4 this year.
Okay, that's about the size of ours. I just wanted to get an idea. And you do the document control with using SharePoint?
That's correct, and I actually manage that. The regional EH&S coordinators certainly help. They are managers of that also, but it's locked down from there. Anybody, of course, can improve this system, and we will edit any document, but we kind of serve as that controller to make sure they're not removing a do not out of there that causes risk. So it works out real well, and every single one of our facilities are drawing from the same SharePoint site and the exact same documents.
Well, thank you.
Certainly.
Any other questions?
I did have one more, Bobby. Ours is being driven from we were recently purchased by S&B out of Europe, and our auditor and anyway, our registrar has already been selected. Now, they talked about, since we have 12 sites, they're talking about using the square root of the total number of sites for any given audit. For instance, we would have 4 sites audited. Okay.
Yeah, usually they'll do it on like a 3-year cycle. So you divide by 3. That way you can get them all within the required ISO certification cycle, which is a 3-year cycle. But yeah,
okay.
I'm following you.
Yeah, and they also said if one site does not pass, it doesn't mean that you lose your certification. You can go to another site, have that audited, pass, but you still have to deal with the site that didn't pass the audit.
Yep, and it may not just stem from that site. You see, if they find something wrong with the system itself at that site, the whole system can fail.
Okay.
So, you got to think of it in 2 aspects. Was it just a particular site failure, or is your management system lacking in some component?
Okay.
Okay, last call for questions. Anybody? Okay, well, Bobby, thanks so much. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everybody else did. I will remind everyone that we have more webinars scheduled. Next week we have a webinar on sage grouse that might interest some of you if you have environmental roles. And August 29th we have a webinar regarding navigating the MSHA data retrieval system and the MSHA website in general. I really think every safety person in IMA should attend this. There are a lot of things you can do on there that you probably aren't aware of. And try to sign up for that. And I'll remind everybody that even if you can't attend at the time it's scheduled, if you go ahead and sign up, you'll receive the recording. And then I'm going to also remind everybody that our annual meeting is coming up in Stevenson, Washington. The Safety and Health Committee will be meeting there. Bobby is the vice chairman of that group, along with a lot of other stuff going on. I do hope you can make it, and you can sign up on our website. It's what are the dates, Chris? September 10th to the 12th. September 10th through the 12th. I think actually 9th through the 12th if you do count the volunteer event. So we hope to see you all out there, and thank you for your attention today, and thanks again, Bobby.
All right, thanks, Errol.